Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott Tailford.
Josh, my friend, hello. The most obvious thing is continuing to be obvious in that Avengers is not doing very well. And Square Enix have got out there and talked about just how much money they've lost. This comes from a write-up over on PC Gamer. They've lost reportedly $48 million, which is 5 billion yen and 36 million pounds. And a lot of that is because of the Avengers. Apparently the Avengers has only shipped 3 million copies, which sounds like a lot, but I'll get to some comparisons and stuff in a bit. I just wanted to sort of focus on the fact that also chiming in with this is the games analyst called David Gibson, who said that the game seems to have cost over $100 million to make, closer to $170 to $190 million, but then again, it only sold 3 million copies. Again, like I said, I'll do some comparison stuff, but he says, why someone didn't say stop after the multiplayer beta will remain a mystery, which I just love the idea of them getting as far as the beta and then just going like, nah. No one likes
this
that.
off, forget about it, you know what I mean?
Just run the other way.
That is a hefty chunk of change, my friend. That is a lot of money to lose. If I lost $40+ million, you bet that I'd have these couch pillows up. I'd be looking down the back of the chairs. I'd be looking for that money somewhere. It is.
Have you found Avengers profits? Nah.
No, it's not there. Where are the keys while I'm on? You know what I mean? When it comes to like the Avengers losses, though, I suppose the writing was always on the wall. And even though they do mention there that saying stop after the beta would have been ridiculous to kind of at that point, they might have ended up making more in the long run had they ironed out a lot of the issues that people had at launch. Because the fact of the matter is, the biggest problem with Avengers, at least in my eyes, was that the game that you were buying at launch was undeniably the worst version of that game. It was the game that had the least amount of content, the least amount of patches, the most amount of bugs, stuff like that, the least amount of customization. And if you wait a few months...
The least to do as well.
The least to do,
over and over
general.
Again.
All for the most amount of money, but if you wait like a few months, you'll have new characters, presumably fixes, maybe the first slew of content is finally dropping and stuff, presumably for a lower price. I think based on like the reactions to the beta, based on the reactions to people playing it, based on the reviews, I think a lot of people just kind of went, this is not in any state to buy into right now. Hopefully it might be further down the line, and that's resulted in a kind of disappointing fiscal quarter or whatever for Square Enix.
Yeah, and it's just like they were right. I was going to say they were on the cusp of the next generation. Obviously, it launched in September, but it's one of those things where they could have maybe just waited a little bit, or at least made sure that this coming week they had a next gen version ready to go, because they've had to get out there and say the PS5 and the Xbox Series versions are going to come in 2021. I also think another wrinkle of this is how much maybe the average consumer, the casual fan of Marvel, just kind of had looked at the character models and just went, "This isn't the MCU. That's not Robert Downey Jr. That's not Chris Evans. I don't care. Like I don't want these stand-ins. I want, after this much time, I want the MCU tie-in version." I think that was maybe something, because I still saw a lot of people saying that in comment sections, that obviously the response when they showed the initial trailer off was like, who the hell are these guys and what the hell's going on? And I think they've kind of struggled to get past that a bit. Some comparisons though, because I wanted to look into whether or not 3 million units is actually bad. It is. But some comparisons. Animal Crossing New Horizons, that sold 5 million copies in its first month. It's done 22.4 million as of August. Final Fantasy VII Remake did 3.5 million in its first 3 days on sale, and that was only on PS4. Spider-Man on PS4 as like another Avengers superhero comparison did 3.3 million in 3 days, which is a thing to sort of point out, that Avengers has been, the numbers that we're counting 3 million on the Avengers side is across 2 months. So all these games doing that figure in a few days is a hell of a difference. And the last one I sort of looked up was just Doom Eternal, released on the 20th of March, and made 3 million copies by the end of that month, and that was only digital sales, that wasn't physical as well. So for all of that to be taken into mind, and then Avengers to just scrape 3 million on multiple platforms in 2 months is pretty disastrous.
Yeah, I mean, I have two separate thoughts on this, and one is about Square Enix and the way they handle kind of game projections in general, and the other is the fact that this is undeniably disappointing from whichever angle you look at it. Like when it comes to those comparisons you just mentioned, like this does suck, you know what I mean? Like 3 million across all of these different platforms for arguably the biggest IP, in the world today, like the MCU, Avengers, even though this isn't related to that directly. Nah, man, like Star Wars is no longer the highest grossing movie of all time. Like Avengers Endgame absolutely knocked that out of the park, you know what I mean? Like especially this time last year, Avengers MCU hype was just unreal, and that has trickled into this year, obviously. So you would expect more from this band of heroes, some of the most known quantities in media today, and the fact that it hasn't even kept pace with Spider-Man, which, like you said, released on one single console. And yes, it was a great game, and yes, it was well received and stuff. It's just like something's obviously gone wrong. The audience obviously hasn't responded in the way that they were expecting. On the other hand, I do think this is partly a symptom of Square Enix having ridiculous expectations for most of their games. And yes, this one perhaps justifiably came under expectations given the weight of it, given the brand awareness and stuff. But every single year, every single time Square Enix does one of these conference calls, does one of these, financial reports, every single game, no matter what it is, always underperforms. They always say that it comes under expectations, that it hasn't made as much money as they wanted. And it's like, maybe you need some new analysts, because none of these people have been right for like 7 years.
Literally, I was going to say, because I remember when it kicked off in 2013, when you had the Tomb Raider, there was all the stuff that they did with Deus Ex, like the Human Revolution, Deus Ex was coming back. The projection that they had for Tomb Raider, and we'll get to like Hitman and stuff as well. Tomb Raider, they thought would sell between 6 to 8 million, which is what the franchise was hitting at its absolute peak, like Tomb Raider 1 through 3, the originals at the early 2000s. 2013's Tomb Raider came in around about the 3 million mark across its first few months, and they said that was drastically under expectation. Even though Tomb Raider had been selling nowhere near the 6 to 8 million mark for the majority of the 2000s, there was just no way it was going to hit that. They also, to bring in Deus Ex Mankind Divided, obviously the sequel, Square Enix had all these insane sales expectations for Deus Ex, and then they forced the devs to put in the breach mode, the microtransaction filled breach mode, which was it's just so money grubby, which is, I still think that's going to be a tell-all story that comes out about the Avengers, that they mandated all of this invisible loot grind BS at some point. And Hitman as well, they had ludicrous sales expectations for that, to the point where when it came in under whatever they'd expected, they let IO Interactive leave with the IP, because to them they didn't think it was valuable, whereas it's freaking Hitman, and like IO Interactive just got to kind of be an indie dev with a AAA label or whatever, IP. And obviously Hitman's gone from strength to strength, and we're about to get Hitman 3, and the series is doing incredibly well. But yeah, like you said, a lot of it seems to fall back on Square Enix, where I don't know who the hell is counting their beans, but they seem to think there's a hell of a lot more beans than what's coming in.
Why'd you spill your beans, boy, is the only question I have at this point. When it comes to like their games in the past, it's like they have grossly overestimated what they expect for them to bring in, and this is like a problem with the video game industry as a large. We look at Dead Space. Dead Space died because EA gave Dead Space 3 ridiculous projections that it was never going to hit, and not only did they give it ridiculous projections, they also tried to change what Dead Space was to appeal to more people, which meant that it appealed to nobody. And that's kind of like an issue that happened with Deus Ex and Hitman Absolution. I quite like Hitman Absolution, but that was very much transforming what Hitman was to be more mainstream, to be more linear, to be more action focused, to hopefully appeal to a bigger crowd. And it didn't appeal to that bigger crowd. It still did well, but it didn't do Square Enix well. And the same thing happened with Deus Ex to an extent. I do think Avengers is, funnily enough, kind of separate to that, because if there's anything that you could or you should bank on being a success, is a multiplayer Avengers game, because like I said earlier, like the IP is just so big and so usually bankable, like you wouldn't it's not really a good comparison to the likes of Dead Space or even Deus Ex, which, while they're known brands within the video game industry, they're not like this massive cross appeal thing. But yeah, I think it's an issue on two fronts at the moment. It's the fact that Avengers clearly went terribly wrong and didn't connect with an audience, and then you've got Square Enix, and this is again emblematic of the fact that publishers in general completely overshoot how much they expect their games to make, and that does result in worse games because they're trying to get in as much money as possible, and kind of like worse situations for fans and developers alike, because it sucks for all the people who put 4 or 5 years of their life into the Avengers to then get a reception like this, to get sales like this. Like that's not fun for anybody. It's not fun for fans, it's not fun for the publishers, not fun for the developers. And it's like, this is yet another example of a live service game gone wrong, after Anthem, after even like the original Destiny or whatever. And it's like, how many more times can the industry make this mistake without learning from it,
I would hope that like this is one of the last straws in regards to that, because like you said, the game that laid this template down was the original Destiny, and that was a complete S show for the first they abandoned it. Like it was rejigged a few months before launch. They managed to get it out the door. Bungie are a good enough dev that it played extremely well, but the actual structure was terrible, and it wasn't until Destiny 2 that it became a more sort of palatable thing to enjoy. And obviously since Bungie have left Activision, they've been able to go free to play, and they've made it work over time. But it feels like that template that they laid down, so many AAA devs, or publishers rather, just thought, well, we'll get one of them. We'll just do that. I mean, it makes so much spreadsheet sense. Business corporate sense to be like, oh, Destiny model, recurring, microtransactions, platform for content, plus the Avengers, plus the Marvel IP, like, oh, that'll be an absolute ton of money. And it just, but actually playing the Avengers for me just felt like a single player game that had been stretched out with various pieces of content removed to either sell back later on, like the characters, or just per level they're just barren because they just want to fill them full of go over here and hold triangle for a bit and then run over here and hold a button again. And it feels like you're running through levels that should have big set pieces in or should have more important things in there. And it's just, to me, it's nakedly obvious what's happened. And maybe that just isn't the case, and maybe they were always planning for this since the beginning, but I doubt it.
I'm going to be interested to see, in a couple, months' time when we get into like next year and stuff. I want to see how much money this game is going to make in microtransactions, because maybe that will be a potential saving grace in the long run. And I kind of hope it's not, because if this manages to make money, through that kind of added revenue, it just almost acts as confirmation that they can just continue releasing games like this, because they'll make it up eventually. We'll make it up in cosmetics. We'll make it up in battle passes and stuff. And to an extent, that's what kind of EA has been doing. I think it was EA or was it Activision? I think it was Activision actually, who recently announced yet another record-breaking year in terms of monetization, in terms of in-game purchases, because of Warzone and Call of Duty and World of Warcraft and stuff like that. And it's like they just continue to make more and more profit every year. And if it works for them, it might end up saving the Avengers. But at this point, do we want monetization like that to save a game like the Avengers? Because we don't want to necessarily confirm this way of thinking, this approach to making video games like this, where you can push out the bare minimum, you can get kind of crappy sales, but if you've got a few whales pumping in 10 grand every few months and for Black Widow skins, like that's not who games should be for, you know what I mean? That's not.
No, I think for me, the solution would be, one, make it free to play. Like, if you're going to have this aggressive monetization thing, I think going forward, if they make it free to play, you have it on PS Plus, you have it on Games with Gold, you unify that thing. So on each month, one particular month next year, you relaunch it. You have all the new skins that they've been talking about, where they're not just palette swaps, they're actual, decent skins that are feel like they're worthwhile for the character. You do that, you make it free to play. You can monetize some stuff without it being too aggressive. But I think the one thing that always solves, or at least goes some way to sort of provide us some sort of balm over how aggressive and incendiary a lot of the predatory microtransactions can be, is making it free to play. And something like Genshin Impact is just flying right now because it's free, it plays well, it's gorgeous to look at, and there's a ton. You can play a lot of that game without having to give in to paying more as you go. And although Genshin isn't personally for me, I can get why that model totally works. And so for the Avengers, I think they've just put every foot wrong, and it'll need something drastic overhauling in regards to the way that we even think about it. Like, if you just said free to play Avengers and it's on your console at the end of the month or the start of the following month or whatever, so many people would at least give it a shot. And if the gameplay is solid enough and it animates incredibly well, it looks gorgeous, it just needs something drastic. So yeah, let us know what you think down in the comments below. Were you an Avengers fan, or did you avoid it based on everything that came out until this point? For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
And we'll catch you next time.
Bye.